Hi all, welcome to BRR Knowledge Center. In this today's session, we'll talk about upstream and downstream of any context, like production process or microservices or open source branches, which you are pushing code into a original branch, etc., etc. So basically, the main agenda of this session was to understand what is an upstream and what is a downstream. We generally heard about these words in APIs or microservices. So, what is the downstream of the services? What is upstream of services in web application development? So, then to understand more on this, we'll start with some non-technical aspects before that, and then we'll jump into the technical terminology to understand what is an upstream and downstream. Okay, let us start with a simple production process. So even though it has nothing to do with the software development, so we can build on that to define upstream and downstream in software development. So if you can just navigate to the here, let me share you the screen. So this is what the non-technical aspects I'm going to explain here. If you look at here, uh, take this. So to deliver in a production, right? To deliver in kind of a product to the outside of market. So we basically collecting of the raw materials. Here I'm just mentioning the collecting of parts, and then we assemble the parts, and then we are going to paint, assemble, and then we are deliver that into a production, right? So here basically we have three steps here. One is collecting parts and assembling the parts, and then painting the assembly. So production process is very similar to a river, so it's easy to grasp that as a process going from one step to the next, and we are moving downstream. So we basically divide this kind of downstream and upstream, and we can deduct the following rules. Basically, we have two rules here. Let me come across that. So we can, let me explain that. I'm just going to take this the font to understand more on this. So we can deduct the following rules. One is dependency rule. Okay. Another one is value based rule. So what is this dependency rule? So in this dependency rule, each item depends on all the item upstream from its viewpoint. So each item uh, uh, depends on all the items upstream from the viewpoint. So if you look at here, in our example here, so from the viewpoint, from here, all the items or each item of on the all the items in the viewpoint, or you can see each item depends on all items upstream from the viewpoint. From here, all the items are depends on the upstream here. So that is what dependency rule. Each item, it depends on all items upstream from the viewpoint. Okay. When I say like my viewpoint is here, all the items are depends on the upstream from the viewpoints. So here, it's going on upstream. And coming to the value rule. So what it is defining what value rule is. So moving downstream, okay, each step adds more value to the product. Okay, each step here add more value to the product. So dependency rule basically explains about so each item depends, or each item depends on all the items upstream from the viewpoint. Where it comes to value rule, moving downstream, each step adds more value to the product. Okay. So now let's try to apply these rules to different software development contexts. So if you look at here, so from the downstream, like means moving downstream, each step, okay, it adds value to the product. Here, this or any other item which is adding plus to the product is nothing but a value, a rule. Okay, let's look at the kind of rules in different areas like upstream and downstream in software dependency. So if you look at here, most software components have dependencies to other components. So what's an upstream dependency and what's a downstream dependency? Okay. So if you look at here, so A and B and C, got it? So component C depends on component B, which in turn depends on component A. Got it? So this component C was depending on B, and B was in any ways depends on EJ. So applying the dependency rule here. So what I define dependency rule. So each item, right, depends on all items upstream from the viewpoint. That's what I defined earlier, right? If I wanted to apply a dependency rule here, we can safely say that component A, right, is upstream from component B, right? Because B is depend on EA, right? So this basically B item is depend on EA. From viewpoint, if I say A is an upstream, so A is upstream from a component B. If I see from a B, if I say like I was here in the B component, that is my viewpoint, A is upstream because towards this B, going upstream of this arrow denotes that A is an upstream, right? So A is an upstream from component B, which is upstream from my component C. Even if I was in the viewpoint here, B is an upstream. If I was in the B, A is an upstream. Okay, so even the arrow points in this directions or different or other directions, but here clearly if I apply a dependency rule here, so I can say that A is an upstream from B, which is from component C, B is an upstream. So applying the value rule here is a little more abstract, but we can say that component C holds the most value since it imports all the features from B and A, right? C is getting imported from B and A. That means the value is more added when it comes to C. So all the features imported from B and A to C, since it imports all the features of component B and A, and adds its own value to those features, making it the downstream component. So these two are upstream. When from here it is an upstream, from here it is an upstream. But coming to the downstream, C is a downstream because C is importing from B and A. It adds values. It owns value to those features. Okay. And then similarly, I think if you look at open source projects, so this is what open source projects I'm going to tell about. So the context where so words upstream and downstream are used a lot in open source development. It's actually very similar to the component dependency as we discussed here, like A and B and C. So consider the projects A and B, where A is an original project. Okay, so this is A is an original project, and B is in a kind of a fork of A. Okay. So here A is an upstream and B is in a downstream because B was imported from A. From a viewpoint, my viewpoint, because as a developer, I was in B because I pulled here and I'm doing something else here in the B. And when I look at upstream, A is a main upstream, right? So B is getting imported from A and it is adding some values by making some changes to the the code or the files or the stuff which you got imported from A original branch. And here you have you are adding some addition to your A, right? So even though you got the stuff from A, you are adding something here as in the fork. Now it's the downstream. This is a rather common development style in open source projects. We create a fork of a project, fix a bug, or add a feature in that fork, and then submit a patch to the version project, right? If you look at this is the A main branch, and I pull out here, I created another fork here, which is the same to EA. And here I'm modifying some stuff or adding some feature or fixing a bug here. And then I'm applying a patch and then pushing back to the EA. That means it is always having addition value when compared to EA. That means this is got imported from EA, it's an upstream, and this is downstream. Okay, so in this context, the dependency rule makes a project A the upstream project, since it can well live without a project B, but project B would not even exist without project A, right? So without project A, B project would not be existing. So that's why a dependency rule makes a project A is the upstream and B is the downstream. The value rule, if you wanted to apply here, since project B adds a new feature, right? Or like kind of fixing a bug or adding a change or modifying a code, it has an added value to the original project of A, right? That means it is a downstream, this is upstream. So each time we contribute to a patch to an open source project, we can say that we have sent a patch to upstream. Each time we are modifying the code and pushing into A, it's always upstream. You are sending data to A from B, right? It's upstream, right? And you are getting a data or files or stuff from A, it is downstream. Okay, now let's see another example called microservices. In system consisting of microservices or just a plain old distributed services for the kind of old fashioned. There's also a talk about upstream and downstream microservices, which is buzzword running in the current market, right? If you look at here, user is here and having service A and service B, right? So in this context, unsurprisingly, the dependency rule, if you are applying, or value rule, if you wanted to apply to this context, service B, right? Service B is depending on service A, right? Service B, I think I got nicely here arrow. I think we'll take a pen here. Let's say, okay, service B is upstream service since service A depend on it. Service B is upstream, right? Because service A depends on service B. Got it? So, and service A is the downstream service since it adds to the value of service B. So from here viewpoint, if we look at here, B is upstream and A is in a downstream here. Because if I see from the viewpoint here, no, service B is the upstream service since service A depends on it. Service A depends on service B, right? And service A is the downstream service since it is adding advantage or adds to the value to the service B. So whatever service I'm getting from here and the feature on the response, and from here I'm adding A service related stuff and then giving it to the user. That means this is downstream because always adding in more value to the service B response. So note that the stream defining what is upstream and what is downstream in this case is not the stream of data coming into the system to service, right? So don't consider that how much and what data is coming from stream of data coming to system via services, but rather than stream of data from the heart of a system down to the user facing services. From the user, no, you look at the data, no, from the heart of the system down to the user facing. Okay, so the closer a service is to the user, the farther downstream it is. Okay, so in any context, whether the concept of upstream or downstream is used, we can apply two simple rules to find out which item is upstream or downstream of another. If an item adds a value to the another or depends on it any other way, it most certainly downstream, right? So as I defined in the rule, like defined rule, which I was explaining here, dependency rule and value rule. So if the item depends on all items upstream from the viewpoint, then you can say it's an upstream. And if an item adds a value to the another or depends on it any other way, it's more certainly a downstream. Okay, so I hope you understand the concept of upstream and downstream with a couple of examples which I've shown you here, like in the open source projects or microservices and other kind of assembling of a part with a paint. So when you look at all these diagrams, you can certainly understand that like what exactly happening when it says upstream and when it says downstream. So all these examples indirectly having the concept of upstream and downstream by applying a dependency rule and value rule. Okay, so thanks for listening to this video, and please subscribe this channel for more videos. Thank you.